The April season of Marvel Snap has been newly datamined, and it looks ridiculous. One note before we jump into it, to my understanding, the way Objective works is it is tracked the entire game. Meaning that if you are looking at a card that says Objective end 2 turns with unspent energy, even if you draw that card after you have done that, it will still count its objective as completed. I will be reviewing the cards under this supposition. If that ends up being incorrect, many of these reviews will also have to be changed. Just want to let you know that up front. It seems to be a bit of a Days of Future Past theming mixed with a second Horseman season. The Season Pass card is Strife. At 4/6, this guy is an objective card that says play 3 on reveal cards, and then when you have done that, use the highest cost on reveal in your hand. This is interesting because this is an objective that you can complete pretty easily and then play him as a sort of pseudo on reveal. I think what this guy looks like to me is a way to get a Fin Fang Foom trigger, a way to get a Shoutout trigger. That kind of thing, duplicating the powerful things that your cards already do, is a well-worn space in the current era of Marvel Snap. They've made plenty of cards that are like this. It's very Absorbing Man-esque, it's very Grandmaster-esque. This is a card that's going to be very similar to those cards. I wouldn't be surprised if it mostly played like an on-reveal when you think about how the Shoutout decks are constructed. Some of the early cards being on-reveal cards would allow this to meaningfully get a turn 5 Shoutout into turn 6 actual Shoutout. That's sort of what I see here, is you want to be able to get a couple on reveals down. Turn 5, this and a 1, it's a Shoutout. Turn 6, Shoutout and a 1, and boom, there you go. You've played 2 Shoulouts. You're obviously very happy to do that. That seems like a very solid and straightforward way of duplicating the power of a Shoutout as a baseline thing. It seems like it could also do some other interesting stuff in other spots, but mostly that's what I see. I also look at this and I see maybe I can try to do some kind of Galactus shenanigans, right? Like you could play this and then play a Hobgoblin for your third on reveal, which would then make this be a Galactus in your hand. That kind of stuff looks fairly compelling to me as like a way to make this a genuine threat on the board that your opponents have to respect, but not actually waste your Galactus on it, so they have to sort of contest 2 lanes. That seems like the kind of thing that would be genuinely problematic to deal with. It's definitely a little bit scary to me talking about it. Largely, though, what's interesting to me about this card is that it is the synergy piece rather than the build-around. A lot of their Season Pass cards recently have been a card that you look at and you say, I need to take this card and multiply it somehow. This is the thing that multiplies rather than the thing that is being multiplied, which is a bit of a departure from where things have been in the recent past. Techno-organic Virus looks to be the card in the Super Premium Season Pass. It's a 1 cost with an on reveal that copies itself to your hand with +2 cost, and then infects your other cards at the location with the text of the Techno-organic Virus, which is ongoing. Cards here have +1, or this card has +1 power for every copy of Techno-organic Virus that you've played. There's one really obvious synergy here, and it's Mobius M. Mobius to allow you to keep repeating the 1 cost part of this. That seems pretty broken when you're able to do it, but it also doesn't stack the way you'd want in a meaningful way, because you're gonna keep replacing it. It seems like it's pretty good. You're gonna stack up, 3 points of power every turn on that lane, but that doesn't actually seem like all that much unless you're also getting rid of text. What's interesting here, though, is if you're playing a deck that wants to get rid of text, you're probably playing Sauron, which means you might not be able to rely on being a Mobius M. Mobius deck for your Techno-organic Virus, which is a whole other can of worms. This is a really interesting card because of what it's doing to deck building. It looks really cool and really awesome, and I'm happy to see like a sort of back-end Sauron type of card, but the most obvious synergy is the Mobius, and Sauron doesn't work with that. And if you're not going to be doing Sauron, then you're just going to be doing this. Maybe you're doing it in like some sort of Debris Rocks deck where you're just like, I'm going to fill up all my stuff and then use this on its own. It's just better to do this than be a Sauron deck. I can buy that, but it is kind of interesting that it's like, you know, this is cool, this is nice, but what I really want to do with this is mostly just like get bodies on the board, use Mobius to spam this, and then probably have it in 2 lanes, right? So like spam this a couple times, it'll be like +4 maybe, and then that'll be like a really good thing to do. That seems like a really compelling thing if you're able to stack it up, but it is still very linear. Like, this is linear scaling, not multiplicative scaling, and I'm not entirely sure Marvel Snap has a lot of room for that. So a lot of this is going to be about the text erasure, I think. This is a Sauron type of card, but that cuts off the best versions of the scaling with the Mobius. Maybe you just eat it and you run both of them. But largely, I think this is a card that presents an interesting deck building hook without asking you or giving you too much for that interesting deck building hook. I would think that this is a reasonable card to play alongside Red Skull type of decks, but I'm interested to see if anyone is able to maximize the Mobius hook more. Wolverine Horseman of War is an interesting card that looks a little bit like some cards that were previously pretty good, like Maverick, and works with some cards like Maverick, and I can see this being like a pretty solid thing to be doing. The basic thing here is he's a 4/3 with an objective to get him to 6 power. When you get him to 6 power, he gives +3 power to a card at every location, so he's going to give +3 power, a total of 9 power out. So really, this is a guy you could look at and say this is a 4/12. 4/12 is good. I'm interested in that. But what makes cards like Maverick so good is that they're able to be so much more than that. When you hit a Maverick with a Sholau, it's more than just the Sholau buff. It's doubling that. This card is giving out capped output, and Maverick's output being uncapped is a big part of the power. I'm not saying that a 4/12 is bad. I think there's going to be games where you're just like play Agony into this and you're really happy with the output. And if you're able to play a fair game of Marvel Snap, that seems like a really reasonable thing to do. A card that I think sort of seems a little bit like Drax, but maybe a little bit worse. This is a card that could be good with things like Jack Flag, depending on where that guy lands. Could be good with things like, generally, what I really think about this card is like, I would like to do something like this in an Aurora deck, but I can't because Aurora doesn't work with objectives. I mostly see Agony as the main thing that works with this, some sort of Agony Maverick shell, but I don't see it being better than doing that stuff in the context of being a Sholau deck. So unless that deck decides it needs a little more like consistent beef and wants to be a little bit less of a combo deck, I'm not really sure this is going to have much of a home, but I do think that the baseline thing it's asking you to do is pretty reasonable. I just wish that there wasn't one clear and obvious thing that was way better to do with this, that being Agony, than anything else. Askani Son is a really cool and interesting card. This is a 2/3 with an activate that scales with how many turns you've been winning his location. Really cool design space. Didn't even know they could do this. He creates a 1-cost card at each other location. If you've been winning the location at the beginning of the turn, that becomes a 2-cost card, a 3-cost card, a 4-cost card. Presumably, it's not going to get much bigger than that because he's a 2/3. But creating a bunch of really legitimately big guys is a really interesting payoff. And this card has really interesting dynamics because this is the kind of card you really want to contest, and being able to contest a card like this is going to be pretty difficult, especially in a world where, when I look at this card, what I see is an amazing Aurora card. That's what I look at when I see this. I already want like 2-3 activators in that deck. I have great 3-drop follow-up to this in that deck. Like, this into a Drax is really scary stuff. There's just a lot going on that I really like about this card that I think is going to be actually pretty viable. This is the kind of thing that looks innocuous, but I can see being a serious boost to the Aurora archetype. I'm genuinely really interested in that. That deck is a deck that really does want to have as many things on as many locations as possible, and even a random shot at getting an Aurora buff means that, like, if you can get this up to like 3s or 4s especially is god gaming, but there's going to be some real points coming out of this guy. And I think that that is a really, really powerful thing to be doing for a 2, that this is the kind of card that is legitimately worth investing in and could really make a statsy kind of deck work again in Marvel Snap. It's been a while. Aurora is the closest thing we have to like a, here's a bunch of tech cards in one deck kind of deck. This is the kind of card that can help support a archetype that needs that kind of support. I'm actually quite optimistic on this card. I think that there are going to be very real worlds where your Aurora deck, this is the best 2 to play. When you compare it to something like even a Herbie or like a Awesome Andy, like this guy I think is going to be better than those cards in almost every situation, while also dictating a little bit of how your opponents are going to play and generally just being a useful and good part of what your deck is already trying to do. I don't know how optimistic others are here. I might be more optimistic on this card than anyone else I've ever talked to. Archangel Horseman of Death is a 2/3 objective where the objective is destroy 4 of your own cards, and the payoff is resurrect 1 here with +4 power. Now, I instinctively feel like this card will not be good unless someone figures out a way for him to be super, super incredibly broken. And I don't know if I'm all the way to that. But when I look at, like, let's say the fire hair decks that are doing things like looping Zombie Giant Man, I don't know if they destroy enough cards. I don't know if they want an untargeted resurrection. Another thing that's interesting about this card, though, is that you can maybe try to target the resurrection by destroying cards that don't actually die. Something like destroying Wolverine or destroying something like a Deadpool or Headpool or really any of those cards that don't actually die. I would imagine they trigger this. They count as being destroyed, especially we know that because of death. So if you destroy 3 of those and then 1 of something else that you want to revive, there is actually a way to target this. I just don't know if it's actually going to be worth doing, and I don't know how it's going to interact with this kind of deck that is going to be willing to play enough of those things. This is like a fine thing to do, but I feel like in order for it to be a major part of a metagame, it's going to need to find something very specific and very powerful to take it over the hump. And I don't think it can do anything that Firehair can't do. So I'm interested to know where people's heads are on that. A card that does stick out as A, a card that you want to die, and B, a card that you want to revive is like a Nimrod kind of thing. So if, like, let's say you kill enough Nimrods, you get a bigger Nimrod, that kind of thing seems like a very plausible thing to do. But I don't know if that's intensifying the output of the deck in a meaningful way, and I don't really think that the biggest problem Nimrod has is point output. It's just that, like, you can beat it if you really want to with a Stardust or something. I'm not seeing the specific use case for this card, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was a specific use case that someone figured out when the card came out and everyone was like, oh, right, that's so obvious. I'm putting this on record now. I don't see anything for that, but if there is one, I want you to know it wasn't obvious in hindsight. I'll tell you that right now, at least not to me. Polaris Horseman of Pestilence is a 2/2 with an objective that reads cards in play are afflicted with -5 power, and in exchange, puts a card from your hand onto the board for free. That's interesting, but I have a pretty big worry about this card. And it ties into a pretty consistent dialogue about this season, which is when you release a card like this, the counter is really, really obvious, and it's going to be people playing Luke Cage. And if someone plays Luke Cage and you're doing this, none of the afflicts even happen, and you just kind of get owned forever. That strikes me as a bad thing. It strikes me as something that is not good and will not be a particularly fun metagame for either the people playing Polaris or the people playing Luke Cage. Just yes or no, kind of binary. There's not a lot of interplay to the counterplay. It just is one size fits all when it comes to Luke Cage. And I realize there's plenty of debate about whether counterplay being complex, like with Star-Lord, is a good thing or a bad thing. But I do think this is sort of the other side of that coin. When the counterplay is very straightforward, you kind of just have to wait until people let you actually play the card. And that is what I expect to happen with Polaris. Outside of that, though, I think my biggest worry for this card is Afflict is a deck that can use a card being pulled onto the board for free. It's very often going to have a lot of, not necessarily all the cards in its hand are going to be playable. But I think it really wants to be able to pick that card. I think that, like, this kind of effect is the kind of thing Afflict wants. They have correctly identified that it's a deck that often ends the game with, like, an impactful 4-drop in hand. but it really cares about where those 4-drops are. It's a deck that doesn't have a lot of margin for error, and so yes, you're going to get a free guy, but it's not going to be nearly as good as actually getting the free guy. And so I think this card is kind of interesting, but the weaknesses to not just Luke Cage, but also Stardust are pronounced, and I worry that the release week will be defined by those cards rather than this card. Mother Askani, a 4/4 with an interesting copy effect. It gives the leftmost card in your hand +2 power, -1 cost, and then gives you a copy of that card. It's very Misery Hood coded. Like, this is a V-hand card. It is at least as good as Misery Hood. It might be better than Misery Hood because it doesn't require you to play the hood in order to make something that is large and beneficial to you. I don't know if it's exactly going to be good enough in comparison with something like a Moon Girl, but it could allow you to get things like Quinjet out of your deck, which is very beneficial for you because that is a major constraint on the deck as it is currently constructed. Being a Moon Girl deck sort of necessitates being a Quinjet deck a lot of the time, which means that you are often constrained on board space, which is one of the things that is holding Victoria Hand back right now. Obviously, enough cheap cards in your deck means that this is copying a Victoria Hand, and that is the greatest thing you can ever do. It's extremely powerful, and I do expect it to be a meaningful addition to what Victoria Hand is doing. I think this is a pretty solid card, but I don't think it can exist in the same deck as the Moon Girl version of Victoria Hand, so I would expect them to conflict with each other and fight over that spot. You probably can't run Hood Misery, this, and Moon Girl. I think you're going to have to pick 2 out of 3. And I think that the likely outcome is you end up with this and Hood Misery as a sort of deference to your board space kind of being a little bit weak, and these are the ones that are going to allow you to go the tallest. And I suspect that will be a reasonable thing to do. But Victoria Hand will have the problems that it typically does, which are largely related to its output not being able to overcome a combo deck's output and needing cheap tech cards to be good in order for it to be able to compete. It's not a coincidence that Victoria Hand really went away when Deafening Chord got nerfed. It's not a coincidence that Victoria Hand started going away when Shadow King got a lot worse. This was a reaction to Shou Lao, yes, but the fact that Shadow King was not good into Shou Lao is really what made Victoria Hand non-competitive in that matchup. That's the big thing that was going on there. And when its tech cards aren't relevant, it's not nearly the threat that it would otherwise be. And I'm not sure we're going to be in a metagame where the tech cards Victoria Hand has access to are particularly relevant. Like, I really do think it lives and dies by what it can run in those last 2 slots. And if it needs expensive cards, it's not really a playable deck. And if the cheap versions aren't matching up well into the meta, it's not really a playable deck. And so as much as I think this is like a good card, I just think that there's a very real world where the metagame is doing things that are way over the top of it, and it's not really able to keep up in a relevant or meaningful way, even though I think this is a great Victoria Hand card. Last up is Storm. Now, Storm is a really interesting card in the sense that its objective basically says, now, you might be looking at it on the screen, you might say, this isn't what it actually says. This is what it actually says. Skip turn 1 and 2, play Storm on turn 3, get +2 points to your entire hand. That's what this card actually says. That is what this card says. Oh, I want to end turns with unspent energy. Yeah, no. I don't care. I don't care about that. I'm not playing a card on turn 1. I'm not playing a card on turn 2. I am playing Storm on turn 3. My entire hand, which again, I did not play a card on turn 1 and turn 2s, which is what I would want to do anyway if I was buffing my entire hand to maximize the value of the buff. Oh, look, my whole hand gets +2 power. Look at my broods. Look at all of that. That's what this card is. That's what this card is. Like people are going to talk about it like, oh, it goes in Star-Lord decks. Star-Lord doesn't care about this. Star-Lord is so far over the top of caring about +2 power to your stuff. Like, you're playing Fin Fang Foom. You do not care if that card is +2 power. This is a Surfer card. That is what Storm is. This card goes in Silver Surfer. This card goes in, interestingly, not Shou Lao. Big fan of that. But like, this is the kind of thing where it's like, we are playing Brood. We are playing Sebastian Shaw. We are playing Viv Vision, maybe even. Who knows? We might not be able to go for priority well enough to do that. But we are skipping turn 1 and turn 2, and we are playing Storm. It's basically just that straightforward. And Surfer already kind of wants to do that. Maybe we're not skipping turn 1 and turn 2, we're playing Storm. Maybe we're skipping turn 1 because we are a Surfer deck, and then we're going to play something on turn 2 and turn 3, and then on turn 4, we're going to float with a 4, and then or with a 3-drop on 4, and then on turn 5, we'll play Storm, and then we'll have a full hand of whatever we want to do on the final turn of the game. Either way, You're going to be able to make this happen in a Surfer deck. You're probably not going to be able to make this happen in a shoutout deck, but I don't know. He's survived worse, I suppose. I think that largely this is just an absolutely excellent card in the context of what Silver Surfer is already doing. It is pre-Surfer. It's a Surfer that happens, and then you have your other Surfer as well. It's very good. I think this is just going to be an extremely solid card. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know which one of your cards that we talked about here is your favorite in the comments. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.